The day of the gathering felt like a moment the galaxy had been waiting for, even though no one could say exactly what they expected to happen. The giant council station floated near a quiet star, far away from every major empire. It was built there so no species could claim advantage, and so every leader would feel the same level of safety. But on this day, safety was the last thing anyone felt. Shuttles and transports from dozens of civilizations arrived one after another. Some came as glowing spheres of energy, others as metal ships shaped like wings or crystals, and others looked like floating stones with engines burning blue. Each ship carried leaders, diplomats, and guards from different worlds. As soon as they stepped out into the long halls of the station, they were greeted by a nervous silence. Even the air inside the council station felt heavier than usual, as if it sensed what was coming. Everyone knew the purpose of the meeting: peace talks with the humans. Humanity had grown fast in the last few decades, building new colonies and forming alliances with smaller species who trusted them. This sudden rise in influence made many larger empires uneasy. Some felt threatened, others felt jealous, and a few feared that humans would become powerful enough to challenge their long-standing control over important trade routes. Because of all these tensions, the council had called for a massive gathering to negotiate terms, set rules, and avoid future conflict. As alien delegates filled the main hall, one thing became clear. Most of them expected to intimidate humans into accepting whatever terms the council decided. Some wore armor to show strength, others carried staffs or badges that represented their authority, and a few simply expressed their confidence through the way they spoke or moved. The mood was heavy, full of whispers and long stares. Then, humans arrived. A single human transport docked with the station, simple in design compared to the shining ships around it. The doors opened, and a small group stepped out. No glowing armor, no weapons, no guards carrying intimidating gear. They walked with calm expressions, their uniforms neat but not flashy. Their leader was a tall figure with a steady gaze and strong posture, someone who didn't need loud words or big symbols to show confidence. The others followed behind, moving in a quiet, purposeful way. The moment they entered, the hall fell silent in a different way. It was not surprise, it was confusion. Aliens from many worlds exchanged looks. Why did the humans arrive with no weapons? Why did they look so calm when they were surrounded by species who outnumbered them and held far more military power? One alien delegate from a reptilian species leaned toward another and whispered that humans must be unaware of how serious the situation was. A soft clicking sound echoed from another group who believed the humans were showing weakness. But a few observers sensed something else, something deeper. There was a type of quiet strength in the way the humans walked, as if they were sure of themselves and everything they represented. The council hall itself was enormous, built to hold thousands. Long tables made of metal and glass stretched in, circles around a raised platform. Every species had a designated area, and the humans took their seats without making any grand gestures. They didn't try to impress anyone. They didn't try to look superior. They simply sat down, calm and ready for the negotiations. The hall's lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of the talks. A large holographic display appeared in the center, showing the outlines of various disputed territories and trade zones. The lead speaker, an elder from a well-known empire, began the meeting with a long speech about the importance of balance and order in the galaxy. The words sounded polite, but everyone could feel the hidden message. Humans should not expand as quickly as they were expanding. As the speech continued, many alien ambassadors nodded in agreement. They believed the council would easily pressure humans to accept new limits on their travel through certain regions. Some even expected humans to ask for forgiveness for stepping into areas controlled by older empires. But the humans remained, silent, listening without any sign of worry. Their lead envoy did not interrupt or show annoyance. They simply watched the hologram, occasionally exchanging small glances with the other members of their team. Not nervous, not anxious, just focused. Tension in the room grew slowly. Some alien leaders began to wonder why the humans were so calm. Usually, species facing strong opposition showed signs of stress-tapping fingers, shifting in their chairs, or whispering among themselves. But the humans did none of that. When the opening speeches ended, the negotiations officially began. A representative from a powerful empire stood up and presented the council's proposal. The terms were strict. Humans would lose access to several important travel routes. Their colonies in certain regions would be placed under council monitoring. Their ships would be required to send travel plans weeks in advance. And their scientific development in specific fields would be slowed through shared agreements. Most of the hall waited for the humans to object or show frustration. Instead, the lead human simply nodded and asked a calm question about how these terms would apply in the long run. The question was simple, but it caught many alien leaders off guard. They had expected emotional reactions, maybe even fear. But humans continued answering and asking questions in the same calm tone. As the discussion went on, some alien generals became impatient. One of them slammed a hand on the table, saying the humans needed to understand their place. The sound echoed through the entire hall. Many species gasped softly. Even members of the council looked uncomfortable. Yet the humans still didn't react. It was this calmness that confused everyone the most. Why weren't they intimidated? Why weren't they afraid? Why weren't they trying to prove themselves? Truth was simple, though no one else in the hall knew it yet. Humans didn't need to prove anything. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew walking into the meeting unarmed didn't make them weak. It made them unpredictable. It made others unsure of their intentions. And it made every aggressive gesture toward them look unfair in comparison. As the hours passed, the hall's atmosphere shifted from arrogance to confusion. Some species whispered among themselves, wondering if the council should soften the terms. Others wondered if the humans were hiding something. One quiet observer from a small species noted that the humans were acting like people who knew something. No one else did something important. The humans themselves were not thinking about creating mystery. They simply believed in fairness, and they knew that the way they behaved mattered more than how loud they spoke. That's why they stayed quiet, focused, and respectful, even when others tried to push them. Near the end of the session, as discussions paused for a break, many alien leaders found themselves watching the human group from a distance. Some studied their expressions, trying to find signs of stress or insecurity. But there were none. The humans carried the same calm energy they had since the moment they arrived. One small group of aliens even debated whether the humans had secretly brought a hidden fleet nearby. They couldn't understand how anyone could remain so confident while being surrounded by species with far larger armies. As the break continued, a simple fact became clear to anyone paying attention. The humans were not intimidated. They were not nervous. They were simply waiting for the right moment to speak, the right moment to act, and the right moment to make their position clear. And that realization made the entire hall feel uneasy. What started as a gathering meant to pressure humanity was slowly turning into something else, something no one expected. The humans were not reacting the way the council predicted. They weren't folding under pressure. They weren't showing fear. Their silence carried more weight than the loud speeches around them. By the time everyone returned to their seats, the atmosphere had completely changed. Leaders from many worlds felt a strange mix of curiosity and worry. They came to the meeting believing humans would be easy to guide. But now they weren't so sure, and for the first time since the gathering began, the alien leaders understood a quiet truth. If a species can stay this calm while surrounded by rivals, they are either incredibly foolish or incredibly powerful. No. One knew yet which one humans truly were, but they were about to find out. As the council reconvened after the break, the tension in the hall had grown heavier. The alien leaders were no longer simply curious about the humans. They were beginning to feel uneasy. The calmness the humans had shown wasn't just confidence. It was a statement, though none of the alien leaders fully understood what it meant. Some whispered to each other, quietly questioning their initial assumptions. Why are they so composed? One said in a low tone, and another replied, It doesn't make sense. They should be worried. They're outnumbered, and they know it. The humans returned to their seats without any display of arrogance. They did not boast, they did not smile smugly, and they did not glare at those who had tried to intimidate them. They simply sat upright and steady, ready to listen. And listen they did, more carefully than anyone in the room. Every point, every proposal, every threat was absorbed, considered, and met with calm observation. Their expressions never gave away even the smallest flicker of doubt. The next speaker at the council was a tall, imposing figure from one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. Covered in dark, metallic armor that gleamed under the hall lights, the speaker carried a staff that seemed to hum with energy. His voice echoed through the chamber as he presented what he called the final proposal. The rules were strict, clearly favoring the established powers. Humans were to give up certain newly discovered systems, share critical technology, and accept limitations on their fleet. The speaker emphasized the word must, trying to convey authority, dominance, and control. As he finished, there was a silence that almost felt like a challenge. All eyes turned to the humans, waiting for some sign of submission. Some alien delegates even leaned forward, eager to see humans finally break. But the humans remained still. Their lead envoy, a calm figure who had watched the first part of the session without a single reaction, slowly raised a hand. The motion was subtle, unthreatening, almost polite. Yet when they spoke, the hall froze. They did not raise their voice. They did not scold or argue. They simply asked a question. If these terms are imposed, how will the council ensure that smaller species are not exploited under the same rules? The question was simple, but it was sharp. It was not about the humans themselves. It was about fairness, justice, and balance. That was something most alien leaders had not expected. They had prepared to intimidate, to push, to demand. They had not prepared to be questioned on principles. A few species exchanged nervous glances, realizing that the humans were focusing not just on themselves, but on the wider galaxy. It was a subtle reminder that humans were not selfish, and that their position carried weight far beyond the negotiation table. Some alien delegates began to murmur among themselves. They are brave, but foolish, one said. They will accept these terms eventually, said another. Yet, as the conversation went on, the murmurs started to change. There was confusion creeping into their voices. The humans were calm, composed, and polite, yet they had an unspoken strength in every word. Their calmness wasn't weakness, it was patience, focus, and clarity of purpose. The tall, armored speaker tried again. He raised his voice, slammed his staff on the table, and demanded that humans acknowledge their position as a minor power in the council's view. He expected fear, submission, maybe even anger. But once again, the humans did not respond the way he expected. The lead envoy leaned forward slightly, eyes steady, voice calm. We are willing to negotiate on the basis of fairness, but we will not compromise principles. That is not a concession, it is clarity. Some delegates were shocked. Many species had never been spoken to this way in such a setting. Most would react with anger or fear, or try to assert power. But the humans were not asserting power. They were asserting truth, logic, and moral reasoning. There was no intimidation. There was no threat. There was only clarity. The hall grew quiet again, except for a few whispers. Observers noticed something unusual, a sense of unease beginning to spread. Some alien leaders shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others tapped fingers nervously on the table. The energy in the room had changed. Where once there had been confidence in controlling the discussion, now there was doubt. The humans were not just participating, they were setting the tone. Negotiations continued for hours. The humans listened carefully to every point, occasionally asking questions that seemed simple but carried deep insight. They did not interrupt, they did not speak loudly, and they did not make anyone feel foolish. Yet every question they asked forced the alien delegates to explain their positions in ways that exposed contradictions, unfair advantages, or vague rules. Slowly, the humans were shaping the conversation without raising their voices or using threats. Some alien generals, frustrated by the lack of emotional reaction, began to try subtler forms of pressure. They leaned forward, narrowed their eyes, and used sharp words that implied consequences if humans refused to comply. They expected humans to flinch, to rise to the challenge, or to react emotionally, but the humans remained calm. Each threat was met with polite acknowledgement and another measured question. Each attempt to intimidate was absorbed and neutralized with careful reasoning. By midday, the hall was buzzing quietly with tension. Leaders whispered behind their hands. "Are they really that confident?" one asked. "Do they know something?" "We don't," said another. Even the smallest species began to feel the difference in the room. Humans had a presence that went beyond numbers or weapons. They commanded attention through focus, clarity, and an unshakable calm. It was unlike anything most species had encountered before. The humans themselves were not thinking about impressing anyone. They were focused entirely on the negotiation. They were thinking about fairness, balance, and the larger implications of the council's decisions. Their calmness was not strategy. It was their nature, a reflection of discipline, patience, and purpose. Every glance, every word, every movement was deliberate. They did not react to provocation. They did not respond to arrogance. They remained fully present in the discussion, fully engaged, fully human. As the afternoon approached, the alien leaders tried one last push. The largest empire presented a detailed plan that would heavily favor themselves, using trade leverage, resource control, and military agreements. The humans reviewed it quietly, without expression. Then, in a calm voice, they asked, "How does this plan address the concerns of the smaller colonies? Will they have a voice in enforcement?" The question was simple, but it struck at the heart of fairness and equity. The larger empires had not considered the smaller species. They had assumed humans would accept the plan because it was framed as unavoidable. But the humans did not accept anything framed as unfair. The room went silent for a long moment. Some leaders were angry, some were frustrated, and some were quietly impressed. The humans had just shifted the focus of the negotiation. The discussion was no longer about intimidating humans. It was about addressing fairness in the galaxy. By the end of the session, no decisions had been finalized. But something far more important had happened. Humans had changed the mood of the council. Alien delegates who had come expecting an easy negotiation now found themselves uncertain, cautious, and even worried. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were beginning to realize it. The humans, on the other hand, gathered their notes, prepared to continue the next session, and moved with the same calm, measured energy they had brought all day. They did not boast. They did not gloat. They simply prepared, ready to continue, fully aware that patience and clarity were more powerful than fear or intimidation. As they walked toward the exit for the session break, some of the alien observers could not help but notice the quiet dignity of the humans. There were no flashy displays, no threats, no arrogance, just a quiet confidence that made everyone in the room feel the weight of the human presence. By the time the humans left the chamber for the day, it was clear that something had shifted. The council, once confident in its control over the negotiations, was now beginning to question itself. How could humans, unarmed and outnumbered, maintain such control over the discussion? What were they capable of if they were pushed further? And most importantly, what did it mean for the future of the galaxy if humans continued to rise with such calm, unwavering strength? Even as they left, the humans knew one thing for certain. They would not be rushed, intimidated, or pressured. They had entered the council to seek fairness, and they would leave only when it was clear that justice had been considered, not just the power of empires. And that simple human resolve, silent but undeniable, was enough to make the entire council begin to rethink everything they thought they knew about negotiation, power, and influence. As the next session of the council began, the tension in the hall had shifted to something heavier, something almost like fear. The alien leaders no longer whispered about how to pressure the humans. They whispered about what the humans might do next. They had expected politeness, patience, maybe quiet resistance. What they had not expected was the calm authority that seemed to radiate from the human delegation, and the way every question, every observation, and every subtle gesture carried weight. The session started like the last one, with a long speech from a powerful alien general. He was a tall, imposing figure with dark, armored scales that shimmered under the lights. His voice rolled across the hall, emphasizing the finality of the council's proposals. He outlined strict rules. Humans were to reduce travel to certain systems, share advanced technology, and submit to oversight in areas that had been previously unclaimed. There were threats wrapped in diplomatic language words like must, required, and non-negotiable, repeated in ways designed to intimidate. The humans listened. No one moved, no one whispered, no one seemed even slightly unsettled. The lead envoy leaned forward slightly, observing each speaker with patience and precision. A hand rested lightly on the table, not tense, not nervous, just present, ready to respond when needed. The calmness was deliberate, quiet, and unnerving. The general's speech ended with a sharp command. You will comply. Do not challenge the authority of the council. His voice echoed across the chamber, and a few alien delegates raised their eyes proudly, as if to signal to the humans that resistance would be futile. Then the human envoy spoke. The words were calm, quiet, and polite, but they struck through the room like a blade cutting through fabric. We do not see this as a matter of submission. We seek fairness. If the council imposes terms without consideration for justice, we cannot agree. There was a pause, a long moment when no one in the hall breathed or moved. The words were not loud or threatening, yet they carried more weight than any roar or slam of a staff. The humans did not ask for permission. They did not beg or plead. They simply stated a truth. Fairness mattered more than power, and they would not compromise it. Some alien delegates shifted uneasily in their chairs. A few looked angry, frustrated that their attempt to intimidate had failed. Others began to whisper among themselves, trying to understand the calm authority they were witnessing. Many had faced strong species before, but none had ever held themselves so composed in the face of overwhelming power. Even some older species, known for centuries of diplomacy, began to feel nervous. The negotiation continued for hours. Alien representatives tried every tactic they could think of. Some raised voices, slamming tables, and demanding compliance. Others used subtle threats, implying consequences that could ripple through human colonies. Some tried to flatter or persuade, appealing to supposed human pride or ambition. But the humans met each approach with the same quiet clarity. They asked questions. They clarified points. They never reacted in anger or fear. Every response was precise, measured, and unshakable. Finally, a commander from a large empire, known across many systems for his aggressive tactics, rose to deliver what he believed would be the decisive statement. He leaned forward, claws on the table, and spoke in a voice that carried both warning and challenge. You will accept these terms. To resist is to invite consequences your species is not ready to face. The room fell silent. The humans did not flinch, did not raise their voices, did not argue. They simply looked at him, eyes steady, posture firm. Then the lead envoy spoke, in a calm voice that carried no fear, no threat, only truth. We are aware of our responsibilities, but we will not compromise on principles. If these terms cannot be adjusted to reflect fairness, we will have to reconsider our participation in these talks. The statement rippled across the hall like a shockwave. Alien leaders exchanged nervous glances. This was not a threat in the usual sense. No one had heard a human yell. No one had seen a weapon drawn, but the implication was clear. The humans were not intimidated. They were not submitting. And they were willing to walk away if fairness was not observed. For the first time, some species began to feel something new. Fear. Not fear of violence, but fear of the unknown. Humans were unpredictable. They did not follow the same patterns of submission or negotiation that most species did. Their calmness, their precision, their willingness to walk away from power and intimidation, it was unnerving. The human envoy remained seated, composed, while the room buzzed with whispered concern. Observers noticed that the humans did not need to speak loudly. They did not need to make grand gestures. Their presence alone carried authority. Alien generals realized that this was a species that valued principle over fear, fairness over power, and clarity over intimidation. Minutes passed, then hours, and still the humans held their position. They did not argue for territory or concessions for themselves alone. They focused on fairness, justice, and the well-being of all species involved. Every question they asked forced the alien leaders to explain and justify their positions, often exposing contradictions or biases. Some smaller species began to nod quietly among themselves, realizing that the humans were advocating for everyone, not just themselves. Even the large empires, used to commanding obedience, felt pressure from the calm integrity of the human approach. Then came the moment no one in the hall expected. The lead human envoy slowly stood. The room went completely silent. Even the generals, who had been shouting or slamming tables, paused. The human did not raise a voice, did not gesture aggressively, and did not make any threatening moves. They simply stood, eyes steady, calm, and unwavering. I thank the council for this session. The envoy said, "We have listened carefully and contributed where possible. However, we cannot accept terms that fail to reflect fairness and respect. Until such terms are offered, we will excuse ourselves from this negotiation." The words were simple, polite, and unassuming, but the impact was immediate. Alien leaders froze. They had not expected the humans to leave. They had expected negotiation, debate, even grudging acceptance. But they had not expected humans to walk away entirely. Murmurs filled the room. Some whispered in shock, others in fear. "They are leaving?" when asked. "No species has ever walked away from the council like this," another said. "Do they know what they are doing?" The humans began to walk calmly toward the exit. There were no guards, no weapons, no flashy displays, just measured steps, heads held high. and eyes that showed nothing but calm determination. The alien. Delegates watched in disbelief. Some reached for communications, trying to signal their fleets or warn their commanders. Others simply stared, unable to comprehend the quiet authority of the human departure dot. As the humans moved, the air seemed to grow heavier. Alien observers whispered that the human fleet might be nearby, hidden but ready. Even without evidence, the certainty in the humans' calmness suggested preparation. They were not leaving out of weakness. They were leaving to make a point. To demonstrate that principle mattered more than fear, some of the alien generals felt panic creeping in. Their words, their threats, their attempts to intimidate had failed. Humans had shown that they would not be pressured, that they would not compromise on fairness, and that they were willing to act decisively if respect was not given. The thought unsettled them. Outside the chamber, the humans walked steadily toward the transport that would take them away from the council hall. Observers from all species realized that this was no ordinary exit. It was a statement, a signal that humans did not negotiate from fear, that they did not yield to intimidation, and that they had the courage to step away when respect was denied. By the time the human delegation reached the transport, the council hall was buzzing with tension, confusion, and fear. The alien leaders had expected debate, confrontation, and perhaps resistance. They had not expected calm authority, quiet confidence, and a willingness to walk away entirely. The humans boarded their transport, engines humming softly, and departed without a word of boast or threat. The silence they left behind carried a louder message than any weapon, any speech, or any display of power. For the first time in history, the council realized that humans operated on different principles. They were not driven by fear, greed, or domination. They were driven by clarity, fairness, and integrity. And in a room filled with empires accustomed to commanding obedience, that realization was enough to create a ripple of fear. Even as the transport disappeared into the distance, alien leaders continued to whisper. They walked away, one said, voice barely audible, and yet they are stronger than any of us expected. Another replied, it is not their ships or their armies. It is their courage and their clarity. The human delegation had shown that power was not always measured in weapons or numbers. It could be measured in resolve, principle, and the willingness to act decisively when respect was denied. And in that moment, the council learned something crucial. Humans were a species to be taken seriously, not because of what they could destroy, but because of what they would never compromise. And that quiet, unshakable strength, the calm certainty of their departure, set the stage for what no one in the council could yet imagine. The humans were not leaving because they were defeated. They were leaving because they had Aurea. As the human delegation's transport disappeared from the council hall, a wave of confusion and tension swept over the chamber. The alien leaders had never experienced anything like this. They had expected resistance, argument, maybe even defiance. But they had not expected humans to walk away completely. A quiet, deliberate walk toward the exit, a simple act of leaving, was now causing more panic than any aggressive gesture could have. The room was alive with whispers, nervous clicks, and murmurs. Some species had never seen such calm courage. Others felt fear rising, even without fully understanding why. The larger empires began to shift in their seats, their confidence shaken. They had believed themselves untouchable in negotiations, certain that every species, including humans, would yield under pressure. Now, they were beginning to doubt everything they thought they knew. Inside the council chambers, one of the elder species, known for centuries of diplomacy and wisdom, leaned toward a colleague. Do they understand what they are doing? They whispered. The reply came quietly, almost fearful. It is not about understanding. It is about certainty. They know what they want, and they will not bend. That is frightening. Meanwhile, sensors and communications officers from several empires began working frantically. Some tried to reach their fleets, hoping to confirm that the humans were not positioning for some unseen attack. Others analyzed energy readings from nearby space, trying to detect if humans had brought reinforcements or secret fleets. All readings, however, showed nothing unusual: no weapons, no hidden ships, no preparations for aggression. And that was the terrifying part. The humans had left without a single aggressive act. No threats, no displays of firepower, nothing that could be called intimidation in the usual sense. Yet their departure carried more weight than any weapon. It was a demonstration of principle, clarity, and calm authority. Alien leaders began to realize that the human strength was not in their ships or weapons. It was in their willingness to act decisively when fairness and respect were denied. In the council chambers, some younger leaders from smaller species whispered nervously among themselves. They walked away. "And we cannot predict what comes next," said one. "I have never seen a species act like this." "It is unsettling," said another. Some older, seasoned generals tried to regain their composure. They attempted to call the human delegation back, sending messages and warnings, hinting at consequences if they did not return. But the human response was clear and calm. They would not return until fairness and respect were acknowledged. Even the tone of their reply carried no anger, no threat, only quiet determination. For the first time, a strange feeling spread across the council. Panic, not the panic of immediate danger, but the deeper, quieter panic of uncertainty. No one knew what the humans would do next. They had walked away, but their calmness suggested that leaving was part of a larger plan, one that no one else could yet see. Back outside the council station, the human delegation's transport moved smoothly through space. Sensors aboard alien ships still tracked them, but found nothing unusual. There were no fleets waiting to jump into action. No hidden weapons, just the humans, calm and unarmed. Yet, even without any aggressive action, their departure had created a ripple effect that spread across the galaxy. Advisors in the council began analyzing the situation frantically. "They are not weak," said one. "They are not reckless, but they are willing to act outside our expectations. That is dangerous in a way we cannot measure." Some leaders, who had prided themselves on their knowledge of galactic politics, found themselves doubting their own experience. If humans could act so calmly and decisively, what else were they capable of? Inside the council, discussions grew heated, though no one dared to raise their voices too loudly. Some factions argued that the humans had overstepped by walking away and that they should be pressured into returning. Others suggested that the council had misjudged humans entirely and that perhaps negotiations should be approached differently. Every suggestion, however, was met with uncertainty. None of the leaders were confident enough to take decisive action. Meanwhile, smaller species, who had been quietly observing the humans throughout the talks, began to feel admiration mixed with fear. They realized that humans were acting in a way that no other species dared. While many had followed intimidation, aggression, or deception in negotiations, humans were relying entirely on principle, clarity, and self-respect. That simple approach had thrown the largest empires into a state of confusion. Reports began to circulate through the council that the human fleet might be positioned nearby, not for attack, but for observation. Sensors picked up strange energy patterns in the surrounding systems. Nothing aggressive, nothing threatening, but the patterns were organized, precise, and deliberate. The message was clear. The humans were prepared for any situation, yet chose not to act violently. They were waiting, and that waiting unsettled every species in the room. The generals and ambassadors who had tried intimidation earlier now realized they had underestimated humanity completely. They had assumed that humans, like most species, would be swayed by threats, displays of power, or pressure. But humans were different. They were disciplined, patient, and resolute. They could act decisively when needed, but they preferred principle over aggression. That made them unpredictable, and unpredictability in the council meant danger for those who relied on control and power. Even the council's most experienced diplomats began to rethink their strategies. One elder delegate admitted quietly, "We assumed they would fear us. We assumed they would negotiate like others. But they do not fear, and they do not submit. That is something none of us have seen before." Another replied, "And that is what makes them formidable." The mood in the council grew tense. Aliens who had once been confident in their positions now whispered about the potential consequences of human actions. What would they do next? How far would they go to ensure fairness? How much of the galaxy's power structure could they challenge without firing a single shot? Every thought led to more uncertainty, and that uncertainty spread. Like wildfire, back in space, the humans' calm presence continued to influence events indirectly. Their transport remained in motion, quiet and composed, but their reputation and previous actions were enough to create doubt and hesitation among alien leaders. The act of walking away had done more than disrupt negotiations. It had shifted the balance of perception. Humans were no longer just participants. They were a force to be reckoned with, not because of aggression, but because of principle and unshakable resolve. Inside the council, debates grew heated. Some empires wanted to pursue aggressive measures to force the humans back. Others argued that any attempt to coerce them would be catastrophic. "We cannot risk it," one diplomat said. "They have shown calm and resolve that we cannot predict. Any misstep could lead to consequences we are not prepared for." Across the room, younger species who had observed humanity's approach nodded quietly. They realized that humans were teaching a lesson without raising their voices or drawing. Weapons, respect, and fairness had become the most powerful tools in the room. The lesson was clear. Strength was not measured by intimidation, but by the courage to act decisively with principle. Hours passed, and the council struggled to regain composure. Every conversation returned to the humans' actions. Every strategy was second-guessed. Every plan that relied on intimidation was questioned. Even the most confident leaders admitted privately that the humans had disrupted the entire session, not with aggression, but with quiet, deliberate authority. As night, or the space equivalent, fell over the council station, the alien leaders began to realize a simple truth. Humans had changed the dynamics of the galaxy in a single session. Without firing a shot, without raising a voice, without brandishing weapons, they had created doubt, fear, and respect all at once. And the realization that humans could act this way again, whenever principle demanded it, weighed heavily on the council. Meanwhile, the humans were far from concerned. Their transport moved steadily through space, engines quiet, crew calm, focused, and ready for the next steps. They did not celebrate, they did not boast, they did not feel triumphant. Their mission was simple: to act with clarity and fairness, and to step away from situations where those principles were ignored. Everything else, the fear, the uncertainty, the nervous whispers, was the natural result of their presence and actions. And so, as the council debated, worried, and recalculated every assumption about human nature, the humans continued quietly through space. They had left the negotiation chamber, but they had not left the situation unresolved. Their actions had sent a message that would ripple through the galaxy. Principle mattered more than power. Clarity mattered more than fear. And humanity was a species that could not be controlled by intimidation or threats. For the first time, many alien leaders understood the humans were not just another species. They were something new, something unpredictable, and something that demanded respect. And that understanding, slow, unsettling, and undeniable, would shape every decision, every strategy, and every negotiation for years to come. In leaving, the humans had not withdrawn, they had changed the game. And the council, now filled with uncertainty and quiet fear, realized that they would have to refi. As the humans moved away from the council station, the alien leaders inside the hall were still struggling to regain their composure. The quiet authority with which the humans had walked away was weighing heavily on everyone present. For hours, generals, diplomats, and council members had tried to analyze the human behavior, trying to find a flaw, a weakness, a reason for their calmness, but every attempt failed. It was as if the humans were playing a game that no one else understood, yet were winning by simply being themselves. Meanwhile, in the nearby sectors, the human fleet was quietly positioning itself. Sensors from several empires had picked up the energy readings of ships moving in precise formations, but no one could confirm their numbers or intentions. The ships were not aggressive. There were no weapons drawn, no formations that suggested attack. Yet every fleet commander monitoring the readings felt a subtle tension, a sense that humans were always prepared, even when they appeared inactive. It was the kind of discipline that commanded attention without a single aggressive move. Inside the council chamber, discussions had reached a new level of panic. The larger empires were now openly questioning their own strategies. They walked away unarmed, and yet they remain untouchable, said one diplomat. How can a species have so much power without ever striking? Another added, it is not about weapons, it is their certainty. Their calmness is a weapon in itself, and we cannot predict how far it can reach. Advisors rushed to gather information. Sensors, scouts, and communications relays worked frantically, trying to map the human fleet, to predict their movements, and to anticipate their intentions. Every report came back the same. The humans were organized, precise, and entirely calm. There was no aggression, no provocation, yet the potential for decisive action was evident in every formation. Some alien leaders began to understand a subtle truth. Humans were not reckless. They were not impulsive. Every step, every decision, every movement was calculated. And the most unsettling part was that humans were willing to walk away from situations where principles were not respected. That principle valued more than immediate gain or fear was a type of power that no one in the council had ever faced. The smaller species, who had been quietly observing the humans throughout the negotiations, were now quietly admiring them. They are unlike any species we have known, whispered one observer. They do not act out of fear or pride. They act with clarity and purpose. That is more dangerous than any fleet we have ever seen. Inside the council, debates turned frantic. Some of the larger empires suggested sending messages demanding the humans' return. Others warned that any attempt to coerce them could backfire catastrophically. Every council member now realized that humans could not be pressured in the way other species had been. Any action that relied on fear, intimidation, or threats was useless. The humans had created a situation where their calm and clarity were a force far greater than aggression. Meanwhile, the human fleet remained in position. Each ship was quiet, precise, and perfectly arranged. It was almost a mirror of the humans' approach during the negotiations, disciplined, patient, and ready for any situation. Observers who were able to monitor the fleet began to understand the subtle message being sent. Humans were prepared, but they did not seek conflict. Their strength lay not in attack, but in readiness and principle. Back in the council chamber, one of the generals from a major empire finally spoke aloud what many others were thinking. They are waiting. They are not retreating. They are watching. And we have no idea what they will do next. The realization sent a ripple of unease through the room. For centuries, these empires had relied on intimidation, strategy, and numbers. Now, They were facing a species that could remain calm and unshakable, yet prepared for decisive action at any moment. As hours passed, the uncertainty in the council became almost unbearable. Every leader, advisor, and general questioned every assumption they had ever made about negotiation and power. The humans had shown that strength was not measured by how many ships one commanded or how many weapons one had, but by the courage to act decisively when principle demanded it. Across the galaxy, messages began to circulate. Intelligence reports described the human fleet's movements with precise, almost clinical detail. Observers noted the calm, organized, and disciplined nature of their formations. There was no aggression, yet the arrangement of the ships conveyed readiness, strategy, and absolute focus. Some fleets even began to pull back slightly, unsure of what action to take, afraid of provoking a species that operated on a level of clarity and principle unlike anything they had faced. Inside the council, panic was growing. Smaller species, often ignored in the past, began to whisper about the humans' fairness and discipline. Larger empires argued among themselves, unsure whether to pursue aggression, diplomacy, or caution. Some diplomats even suggested that perhaps it was time to offer new terms, ones that reflected fairness, respect, and acknowledgement of the humans' growing influence. The humans themselves did not act with urgency. They remained calm, their fleet moving slowly but precisely. The message was subtle but powerful. They would not be rushed, they would not be intimidated, and they would not abandon principle. Every alien leader who monitored the situation felt the weight of that quiet discipline. It was as if the humans were saying, without words, that they would act when the time was right, and that everyone should take notice. Some empire leaders began to feel the first true sense of fear they had ever experienced regarding humans. Not fear of violence, not fear of weapons, but fear of principle combined with discipline. The humans had shown that their strength lay not in aggression, but in their ability to act calmly, decisively, and with purpose. That was a kind of power that no one could predict, control, or manipulate. Reports circulated that humans were not just waiting, they were observing, calculating, and ready to act if necessary. Their calm presence had created hesitation among fleets, uncertainty in council chambers, and doubt in the minds of some of the galaxy's most powerful species. It was becoming clear that humans had shifted the balance of power, not through conflict, but through focus, clarity, and principle. By the end of the day, alien leaders were exhausted, both physically and mentally. Every strategy, every plan, every assumption had been challenged. Humans had demonstrated that they were not just participants, they were game changers. They had not fired a single shot. They had not raised a voice. They had not threatened anyone. And yet, the calm authority with which they acted, the discipline and precision of their fleet, and the clarity of their principles had caused the most powerful empires to question everything they thought they knew. Even as the humans moved further from the council station, the effect of their actions continued to resonate. The council realized that they would have to change the way they approached negotiations, power, and diplomacy. The humans had shown that principle mattered more than force, clarity mattered more than intimidation, and the willingness to act decisively could change the course of the galaxy without violence. And so, as night or the space equivalent fell over the council, the alien leaders understood a simple truth. Humans were a species unlike any other. They did not operate on fear, aggression, or greed. They operated on principle, patience, and readiness. And the uncertainty of their next move, combined with the quiet discipline they had displayed, had created a power no one could underestimate. The humans were not moving to attack. They were not showing dominance. They were simply prepared, calm, and principled. And that combination, more than any weapon, more than any fleet, more than any empire, was what made them dangerous in a way no one had predicted. Across the galaxy, Intelligence reports began to reflect a new understanding. Humans were not to be underestimated. Their actions had disrupted the Council, unsettled the largest empires, and inspired smaller species. They had done all of this without aggression, without threats, and without arrogance. Their presence alone was enough to make powerful leaders rethink their assumptions, recalibrate their strategies, and reconsider their approach to negotiation and conflict. In that moment, the Council and the galaxy began to understand the hidden truth. The human strength was in their clarity, their principle, and their readiness. And every species that had watched their calm departure and precise fleet movement knew that if humans chose to act, the consequences would be decisive, focused, and unavoidable. The quiet authority of the humans, their discipline, and their refusal to compromise principle had shifted the entire balance of power. The Council realized that they had underestimated humanity, and that underestimation could have consequences far beyond the Council chamber. And so, the humans continued quietly through space, calm, disciplined, and unwavering. Their message was clear. They would act when the time was right, and until then, they would maintain their principle and their readiness. The galaxy, now aware of their potential, waited, uncertain of what would come next. After the humans had walked away from the Council chamber, the room was left in a silence that no one could break. The air felt heavier than before, filled with tension, confusion, and something new respect. Alien leaders who had once believed that control and intimidation ruled the galaxy now understood, in a very real way, that power could come from principle, clarity, and calm decisiveness. Hours passed, and still no human voices were heard from the Council's communications channels. Some alien generals wanted to declare the humans' actions rebellious, even dangerous. Others, especially from smaller species, argued that humans had shown something important, something the galaxy had long forgotten: fairness, courage, and the strength to act without fear. One of the larger empires convened a secret meeting. The generals, advisors, and diplomats who had tried to intimidate the humans argued heatedly. "We must force them to return," shouted one, banging a clod, hand on the table. "They cannot leave negotiations unfinished. That is unacceptable." Another voice, quieter but firm, replied, "Do you not see what they have done? They have already won. By walking away, by refusing to compromise their principles, they have changed how every species will approach diplomacy from this day forward." Room fell silent as the words sank in. For the first time, leaders realized that humans had not abandoned the negotiations out of weakness. They had done it out of strength. Their calm authority, their clarity of purpose, and their willingness to act when fairness demanded, it had shifted the entire balance of power. Meanwhile, the humans were far from idle. Their fleet, though quiet and unarmed, moved with precision across nearby systems. Sensors from various empires tracked their movement, but nothing aggressive was detected. The humans were not preparing to attack. They were preparing to observe, to measure, and to act if the situation required. Every ship, every formation, every move reflected discipline, planning, and readiness. Alien observers began to understand something crucial. Humans did not need to show strength to command respect. Their clarity, their principles, and their quiet decisiveness were more powerful than weapons or fleets. Even the most aggressive species in the Council began to acknowledge this truth, though no one wanted to admit it openly. Back in the Council chamber, debates became more reflective. Some species argued that it was time to reconsider the terms offered to humans. "Perhaps we have underestimated them," said one diplomat. "Perhaps we need to negotiate from respect, not intimidation." Others nodded, though reluctantly. Even the largest empires, who had once relied on numbers and firepower to maintain control, recognized that humans had shown a different kind of power. that could not be ignored. Reports from the galaxy continued to flow in. Intelligence officers described the humans' movements in detail, noting the discipline, coordination, and calm focus of their fleet. Nothing threatening, nothing aggressive, yet everything about their organization implied readiness and capability. The humans had made it clear. They were not reckless, but they were prepared. And that preparation, combined with their refusal to compromise principles, was enough to unsettle even the most confident species. For smaller species, the humans' actions were inspiring. They saw a species that did not bow to fear or intimidation, that acted with fairness, clarity, and courage, and that had the confidence to walk away when respect was denied. Many whispered among themselves that humans were showing a new way to engage in galactic diplomacy, one that valued principle above power. In the council chamber, a senior elder from one of the oldest species spoke quietly but firmly. "We have underestimated humanity," they said. "They have shown that their strength lies not in weapons or fleets, but in principle, patience, and decisiveness. That is a kind of power we have not seen in millennia." Some alien leaders frowned, struggling to accept this. "They have no weapons drawn," one said. They walked away. "How can that be strength?" The elder responded, "It is strength because they act with clarity and courage. They do not yield to fear. They do not compromise what is right. That is a lesson we have all needed, whether we realize it or not." The humans' transport and fleet continued to move quietly through space, never aggressive, never threatening, yet fully prepared. Observers began to notice the discipline of every crew member, the precision of every formation, and the calm confidence that radiated from each movement. It was as if the humans were sending a message without words. "We are ready, we are principled, and we will act when it is necessary." Back in the council, alien leaders began to reassess their assumptions. They realized that the humans' calmness was not weakness, but a strategic choice. Their willingness to walk away had demonstrated that principle could hold more power than intimidation. Even those who had once relied on fear now acknowledged that humans were a species that demanded respect, not through force, but through their actions and character. Some smaller species quietly celebrated. They had witnessed a demonstration of courage and integrity that was rare in galactic politics. For them, humanity represented hope, a species that could stand firm, act decisively, and influence the galaxy without resorting to violence or manipulation. Larger empires, meanwhile, were forced to reconsider their next steps. Every action taken to coerce humans now seemed risky. Any attempt to pressure or intimidate them further could backfire, potentially creating consequences that no one in the council could predict. The humans had shown that they could act decisively when fairness demanded it, and that unpredictability was a power no empire could ignore. Even the generals and fleet commanders, who had once believed they could control or manipulate humans, began to rethink their strategies. They realized that every move, every decision, and every negotiation would have to account for a species that acted on principle, clarity, and calm authority. The humans had changed the rules without firing a single shot. In space, the human fleet remained calm but vigilant. Sensors monitored nearby systems, energy flows, and signals from other species. The humans were not aggressive, but they were prepared. Their discipline and focus ensured that they could respond instantly if needed, and that readiness alone was enough to command attention. Back in the council, leaders debated how to approach the humans if negotiations were to continue. Some argued for compromise, suggesting terms that reflected fairness, respect, and acknowledgement of humanity's growing influence. Others feared that any mistake could provoke humans to take decisive action that no one wanted to face. The smaller species began to whisper about the humans' integrity, courage, and discipline. "They are unlike any species we have seen," said one observer. They do not act out of fear, greed, or ambition. They act with purpose, clarity, and fairness. That is their strength. By the time the galaxy's leaders had processed what had happened, one clear understanding emerged. Humans were no longer just participants in galactic diplomacy. They were a force that could influence outcomes through principle, clarity, and calm decisiveness. They had demonstrated that strength was not always measured by weapons, numbers, or intimidation. It could also be measured by courage, discipline, and integrity. As night or the equivalent in space fell across the galaxy, the humans continued to move quietly, disciplined, and ready. They had made their point. They had demonstrated that they would not compromise principle for fear or convenience. They had influenced the Council, unsettled the largest empires, and inspired smaller species, all without aggression or arrogance. And in the council chambers, a quiet realization spread among every leader. Humanity had changed the way diplomacy would be conducted. They had shown that a species could command respect, influence decisions, and alter the balance of power, not through threats or intimidation, but through clarity, principle, and courage. The humans had left the council physically, but their presence was felt everywhere. Their calm authority, their readiness, and their unwavering principles had left a lasting impact. Every species now understood that the humans were a force to be respected, not through fear, but through the strength of their character and the decisiveness of their actions. By the end of the cycle, it was clear humans had not just walked away, they had won. They had shown the galaxy a new kind of power, one that relied on integrity, focus, and courage. The Council, the empires, and the smaller species would never forget the quiet strength of a species that acted decisively, stood firmly by its principles, and influenced the galaxy without firing a single shot. And so, as the human fleet continued its steady journey, prepared for whatever the galaxy might demand next, the leaders of every empire and every council chamber realized the truth. The humans were not just another species. They were a force that could not be underestimated, and their presence had forever changed the rules of diplomacy, negotiation, and power across the stars.